living as an innovationist. There's a story of the blind men and the elephant. And the story goes that there were a group of blind men, and they were all presented with an elephant, which they could not see, they could only touch, and they were all asked to describe the elephant. And they all touched different parts of the elephant. And one guy was asked to describe the elephant, and he said it looked like a snake. And another guy was asked to describe the elephant, and he said it was flat. And another guy was asked to describe the elephant, and he had touched the elephant's ears, and he thought it was very thin. And another guy was asked to describe the elephant. He said it was pointy, or because he touched the tusks, and that they were all correct. They had all touched different parts of the elephant. But what they were describing was different parts of one big thing, different aspects of one big thing. And you have to see the whole picture, you're seeing an elephant. But if you can only touch it, you're only going to touch one part, and you're going to project that part to be the entire reality. And that often when we're dealing with things like politics, religion, and philosophy, that's how it can be. That's how it can be. Is that you don't know exactly what everything is, and that there's one side of everything that sometimes people see one aspect of something and they blow it up into something big. And sometimes people see another aspect of something and they blow it up into something big, and they're not lying. They're seeing one aspect of reality, one aspect of the nature of the universe, but they're not seeing the whole picture. And that's often what things can be like. And that I've said many times on these streams that we need to get past judging people by what they call themselves, right? Right now in this world, there are Christians, people who speak in the name of Jesus Christ, that are doing great things. And there are people who speak in the name of Jesus Christ and call themselves Christians that are doing awful things and playing a very negative role. There are people in this world who call themselves Muslims who are doing great things. And there are people in this world who speak in the name of Islam and call themselves Muslims that are doing awful things. There are people who call themselves communists in this world who are doing great things. There are a lot of people, especially in the United States and in the Western countries, who call themselves communists that are doing a lot of bad things, that are not playing a good role. And that if you judge people by what they call themselves, you're missing the picture. And that, increasingly, the Center for Political Innovation, we find that people who don't agree with us ideologically, but share our goals, are much easier to work with than people who say they agree with us. There are a lot of people who say they agree with us, or they say they agree with what we've said over the years or whatever. They're not very helpful in getting things done. Meanwhile, there are great people who don't agree with us, don't agree with our perspective, but they share our goal of peace with Russia, peace with China, building and constructing. Angela McCurdle, libertarian who I really admire, was leader of the Libertarian Party, just a great person. And I really admire her, even though she does not agree with me about economics. She's from a completely different school of thought, libertarianism. But I greatly admire her, and she is happy to work with us at CPI. And, she had us be sponsors of the Rage Against the War Machine rally. I've been on her podcast, and, great things are happening. We have a very vibrant, active relationship with Angela McCurdle. Whereas there are people who call themselves communists, and even people who call themselves the same kind of communists or whatever that we used to be, that do nothing but talk trash about us on the internet. And that you can't judge people by what they say they are. You have to judge people by what they actually do. And that all of these worldviews have truth in them. But none of them really are seeing the whole picture. And none of us really have the whole picture, but we're trying to do our best with what we know. And that's why I'm talking about the elephant. I'm talking about the elephant story because I'm gonna open this presentation tonight about living as an innovationist by basically showing different places where people have described similar things. And the first thing I'm going to start out with is Confucius. Right? Confucius is considered the genius of Chinese civilization. Right? He is very much the founder of traditional Chinese culture, just a greatly admired and respected figure, one of the most brilliant minds in history, really deeply influential on not just China, but on Korea, on Japan, on many societies in Asia. Just one of the most important thinkers in world history. And there's one quote from him. He says, "The man who says he can and the man who says he can't are both correct." Meaning that, if you have the attitude of you're not going to succeed, you won't. And if you have the attitude that you will succeed, you will. I like that quote. But tonight I'm going to use a much more complicated. Sorry, I've got some water here. Just some much more complicated quotation from the great Confucius that I think is a great way to start the presentation. And this is from the Book of Rites that was published in the 1st century BC, and one of the most important books of Confucian teachings, one of the oldest ones. It's published, at least 100 years before Jesus Christ was born. Yan Yan, and it's a reminiscence of the great Confucius. Yan Yan was by his side and said to him, "Master, what are you sighing about?" And Confucius replied, "I never saw the practice of the grand course and the eminent men of the 3 great dynasties, but I have my object in harmony with theirs. When the grand course was pursued, a public and common spirit ruled all under the sky. They chose men of talents, virtue, and ability, and their words were sincere, and they were cultivated with harmony. And thus men did not love their parents only, nor treated as children only their own sons. A competent provision was secured for the aged until their death, and employment for the able-bodied, and the means of growing up for the young. They showed kindness and compassion to widows, orphans, and childless men, and those who were disabled by disease, so that they were all sufficiently maintained. Males had their proper work, and females had their homes. They accumulated articles of value, disliking that they should be thrown away upon the ground, but not wishing to keep them for their own gratification. They labored with their own strength, disliking that their strength should not be exerted, but not exerting it for only their own advantage. In this way, selfish scheming was repressed and found no development. Robbers, filchers, and rebellious traitors did not show themselves, and hence the outer doors remained open and were not shut. And this is the period that we call Great Unity. Now, what in the world does this mean? This is a very odd piece of writing. It's a very, very odd text. What he's saying is he's sad one day, and one of his followers, Confucius, is asking him, "Why are you sad?" And he says, "I'm sad because I'm never going to see the great course," which is the way he's teaching, urging people to honor their relationships and live in a moral way, etc. I'm never going to see it play out. And the ultimate conclusion of my philosophy and my teaching is going to be a world where people love not only their own parents, but everyone else's parents. And people love not only their own children, but everyone else's children. And that there's enough to secure that old people are taken care of until they die. And every person has a job and is employed. Every able-bodied person is employed, and every child is given education and a means of growing up. And there's kindness and compassion to widows and orphans and childless men and those who are disabled by disease. And they're all sufficiently maintained, and all the men are working, and all the women have beautiful homes. And there's a whole lot of wealth and value everywhere. And people aren't being wasteful, but there's also a huge amount of wealth. And people are able to just take that great wealth for themselves, and they don't need it for their own gratification. And they work because they want to be productive, and they want to create. They want to work, but not for selfish reasons, because they want to work in order to make the world a better place. And there's no robbers, and there's no thieves, and there's enough to go around that everyone's happy. And there's no robbers and there's no thieves. And as a result, when he talks about the outer doors, we don't have to have big walls around our cities anymore. In fact, we don't even need a government of any kind. We can just, people can just do what they want, because there's no robbers, there's no thieves. Everyone has enough. Everyone has what they need to survive. There's no homelessness. Every child is taken care of. Every old person is taken care of. There's fulfilling work for everybody. There's great wealth everywhere. People have become selfless. There's no need to be greedy. What is Confucius describing in this text? Well, if you come at things from a communist perspective, that's communism. And the Chinese Communist Party now points to this to argue that communism is in line with China's great tradition. He's describing a world of vast abundance where no one is without, and as a result, the selfishness and cruelty that comes with scarcity, man's inhumanity to man, fades away. Confucius understood, it seems, that poverty is the basis of inequality and the need for the state and all of that, and that a world could be achieved where there was enough wealth for all, where everyone was taken care of, and there was not crime and there was not cruelty, and everyone had enough, and everyone lived a fulfilling life. People worked because they enjoyed it. They found fulfillment in their work. They didn't have to work. No one was toiling to survive. And he's arguing that his teachings were intended to bring humanity that way. It was called the Grand Course, the way Confucius urged people to live, filial piety, relationships, loving each other, being frugal, etc. Confucius was hoping that his teachings could eventually set the stage, set the stage for building a world of peace and abundance. And that's the idea. And that's Confucius, right? And he says this, it's written in the 1st century BC. He lived much earlier than that. He lived in the 5th century BC, 500 years before Christ. You have Confucius laying out his vision of the great unity, which sounds a lot like communism. Sounds like the higher stage of communism. But it's not just Confucius. 500 years later, there's a guy named Jesus of Nazareth who comes along, and there's a movement called Christianity. And what does the Christian Bible says? Right? This is the book of Revelations. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud. And upon the cloud, one sat unto the Son of Man, having his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust his sickle into the earth, and the earth was reaped. And another angel came out of the temple, which is heaven, also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine into the earth, for her grapes are truly ripe. And another quote from Revelations. And he showed me a pure river of the water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. And in the midst of the street, and on either side of the river, was there the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruits every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him, and they shall see his face, and his name shall be on their foreheads. And also Luke 17, 20, 21, Jesus Christ. And then he was demanded of the Pharisees when the kingdom of God should come. And he answered them and said, The kingdom of God cometh not with observation. Neither shall they say, Lo here, or lo there, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you. He's saying that the idea that you're going to, just sit back and watch the kingdom of God, this heaven on earth, come into existence, the harvest of the earth with a vast abundance, the idea that it's just going to sit back and come, that's not the point, right? You're not going to be able to sit back and say, Lo here and lo there and behold, because it's coming from us. It will be human beings embracing our creative ability, human beings standing up and pushing forward and innovating and creating that will bring about the kingdom of God on earth. It is within us. And the kingdom of God is the reaping of the harvest of the earth. It is vast abundance that is going to be created. Kind of reminds you of Confucius. But then, of course, if you want to take it from the Marxist perspective, this is what Karl Marx explained. Right can never be higher than the economic structure of society and its cultural development conditioned thereby. In a higher phase of communist society, after the enslaving subordination of the individual to the division of labor, and therewith the antithesis between mental and physical labor has vanished. After labor becomes not only a means of life, but life's prime want. Doesn't that sound like Confucius? After labor has become not only a means of life, but life's prime want. After the productive forces have increased with the all-around development of the individual, and the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly. Only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety, and society inscribe on its banners, from each according to his ability, and to each according to his needs. So what is Karl Marx saying? He's saying that there will come a time where, with vast abundance, the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, that people will not have to work, right? After labor has become not only a means of life, but life's prime want, meaning people won't have to work, but they'll do it because they want to. After the productive forces have increased with the all-around development of the individual, and the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, the enslaving subordination of the individual to the division of labor, and therewith the antithesis between mental and physical labor, is vanished. Only then can we reach a society where people can just do what they feel like doing, from each according to his ability, and take whatever they need, to each according to his needs. Again, doesn't this sound like Confucius? Doesn't this sound like the Revelation? Doesn't this sound like Jesus? The kingdom of God is within you. Doesn't this sound like Karl Marx? It's all pointing to the same thing. These are all parts of the elephant. And that's what I would like you to understand. These are all parts of the elephant. And that we are trying to build a society where people have what they need, where human creativity and brilliance is unleashed. We are trying to build God's kingdom on earth, the great unity, communism, whatever you want to call it. They're all talking about the same thing. And we're trying to create that. And the basis of that is increasing the wealth of society. It is human beings doing what we do, inventing, creating, expanding our life expectancy, expanding our living conditions. That is the road to this higher world. And you can see this in Confucianism, and you can see this in Christianity, and you can see it in Marxism. And it's just something that we have been innately aware of, is that human beings are builders. And if we continue to build, we can build a society without repression, without want and hunger, and without injustice. That is what human beings are capable of doing if we get our shit together, right? If we start living for the sake of others, if we start following the great course of Confucius, if we have a rationally organized economy where the means of production function for the good of society, not the wealth of private individuals, we rationally plan production. If we organize society in a healthy, rational way, we can unleash human ability and we can get to a society where people have what they need. And again, if you want to call that communism, fine. And if you want to call that Christianity, fine. And if you want to call it Confucianism, fine. We call it innovationism because there's a lot of people speaking in the name of all kinds of ideologies who are really not helping us get there, right? However, we are trying to build a movement that can help get America on the road and get the world on the road to building such a society. And it can be done. But the woke left is not going to get us there. The regular right wing is not going to get us there. We have to do it ourselves. And no, it's not going to be observed, right? Jesus said the kingdom of God is not to be observed. It's not just going to come down from the sky. The kingdom of God is within you. It is on us to build that movement. We have to build it. The idea that it's just going to come, it's just going to naturally, appear, right? It's not how these things work. We human beings have to innovate, and we have to utilize our willpower to stand up against injustice, to unleash human creativity and brilliance, and we have to make it happen. So that brings me to what makes humanity unique. Friedrich Engels, he says, the animal merely uses its environment and brings about changes in it simply by its presence. Man, by his changes, makes it serve his ends, masters it. And this is the essential, final distinction between man and other animals. And once again, it is labor that brings out its distinction. Human beings force the environment to serve them. All the other species, they interact with their environment, but we force the environment to serve them. And this is also reflected in Genesis. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, master it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and the fowl of the air, and every living thing that moveth on the earth. And that human beings, we master our environment. We force the environment to serve us, and that we're constantly reinventing the way our environment serves us, right? First, we burned wood. right? The legend, the ancient Greeks, they have the legend of Prometheus, and Prometheus is the guy who brought fire to mankind. He taught human beings to burn wood, right? And that was the birth of human intelligence, when Prometheus stole fire from the gods. At first, we were burning wood, and then we figured out how to burn coal, and then we figured out fossil fuels, natural gas, oil, petroleum, and then we figured out nuclear power. And now we've got nuclear power, and hopefully soon we can have fusion energy. We're constantly moving toward a higher energy source as a species, right? And just a moment to point out why the environmental movement is toxic. Is they say, oh, we're just going to run out of natural resources. You know what? If we were still burning wood, if we were still at the beginning burning wood, we would have deforested the planet about 5 times over by now, right? And in Haiti, a deeply underdeveloped, impoverished country, they are still burning wood in order to heat their homes. And that's not a good thing. It's a problem. And yeah, they're in the potential of running out of wood. And if humanity was still burning wood to keep warm in the winter and burning wood to power ourselves, and that was our main energy source, we would have deforested the planet. Except we have innovated, and we learned how to burn coal and burn natural gas, and we developed nuclear power and nuclear power. And now China is getting helium-3 from the moon and figuring out and making great breakthroughs in nuclear fusion, cold fusion. So the idea that, oh, we're just going to run out of resources. No, we're going to innovate new ways to develop, right? We haven't run out of wood because we innovated beyond burning wood to survive. And, and we're not going to run out of oil because we've already innovated nuclear power and new ways to have energy. And that is what we need to understand, right? Human beings are constantly reinventing their relationship with nature, increasing the population and increasing the life expectancy. Right? Human beings live way longer than they used to. There's a lot more of us than there used to be. And at the same time, as we are reinventing our relationship with nature, we reinvent our political and economic system. We were hunter-gatherers for a long time. And out of hunter-gatherer civilization, we innovated agriculture, growing crops, domesticating animals. That led to a higher mode of production, a political economic system called slavery. And slavery led to a higher mode of economic and political system called feudalism. And out of feudalism came a higher mode of economic and political order called capitalism. And capitalism gave way to something that we live under now, which is, you could argue it's still kind of capitalism, but it's a new form of capitalism called imperialism globalism. Capitalism in its monopolistic stage, the rule of the world by big banks and monopolies based in Western countries. And imperialism globalism is in a crisis right now. And around the world, there is a new way of doing things that has emerged. And in the United States, we are calling that innovationism. And we'll get into what that new way of doing things is. But the imperialist globalist system is in an all-out fight against this new way of doing things, this new order that has emerged because of the BRICS countries, because of the Bolshevik Revolution, etc. And it's not classical Marxism, Leninism, but it's the new world that is emerging. And innovationism is the future. And we are building a movement to break free from globalism, imperialism, and unleash humanity's creative power. And that movement in America is called innovationism. Now, there's a distinct difference between imperialism, globalism, the system we live under, and regular capitalism. Why? In regular industrial capitalism, it's the rule by factory owners. Some people own the factories and some people work in the factories. Now, factory owners can be very ruthless. If their workers want to raise and go on strike, they might shoot them down. They try to pay their workers as little as possible. They try to work their workers as long as they can. We're not saying factory owners are great. However, factory owners still have an interest in the wealth of society increasing because they have to sell products. They make their money by selling products. And if society becomes poorer and poorer and poorer, they are not selling more products. Now, are they? And there's an inherent problem with the factory owner production, private, production, which is there's never enough wages paid out to buy the products that are sold. And we can talk about that. We've talked about that many times on these streams, the value crisis, the problem of overproduction, the tendency of the falling rate of profit. However, there is a fundamental difference between a factory owner and a banker. A banker wants to maintain economic dominance by staying at the top. and that includes holding back development. The factory owner needs society to keep getting richer so people buy his products. The banker is fine with society getting poorer and poorer and poorer, because the poorer people are, the more they're going to depend on the banker and his control of the purse strings of credit. Industrial capitalism, despite all of its problems, was pro-economic growth and in favor of development. However, what we live under right now, this monopolistic stage of globalism, imperialism, is anti-growth. And the main way it props itself up is by keeping countries in poverty, and it seeks depopulation. We'll go over some quick examples of that. I mean, the British, they went to India, and the people in India had been weaving for hundreds, thousands of years. They'd been weaving their own cloth. And so the British went to India and they said, wow, we're colonizing you and you're weaving cloth. So we're going to help you build up your mills and you can grow lots of cloth. And we're going to turn India into a giant cloth factory and we're going to have economic growth. Is that what the British did in India? No. The British went to India and they burned the textile looms and they forced the people of India to import their cloth from Britain. They underdeveloped India and made it a captive market for their products. And Nigeria is a country on the African continent that right now is the top exporter of oil in Africa. No country in Africa is exporting more oil than Nigeria. So, of course, Nigeria is a super wealthy country. The people in Nigeria live in absolute luxury. They all live in palaces and they're all super rich and they're very prosperous, happy people. Is that the case? No. The people in Nigeria have a low life expectancy, a low rate of literacy. The infant mortality rate is through the roof. The people in Nigeria are living in utter poverty. Why? Well, the oil of Nigeria isn't going back into Nigeria's economy. It's going into the hands of ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. And big sections of Nigeria don't have electricity, and big sections of Nigeria don't have running water. And lots of Nigerians live in extreme poverty, even though their country is super wealthy, because it's under the domination of Wall Street bankers and corporations. Another example, right? Have all these countries that the USA has attacked, have any of them gotten better as a result, right? The USA invaded Afghanistan, overthrew the Taliban, and for 20 years, the USA was occupying Afghanistan. And did Afghanistan become more stable and more prosperous? Did it develop a strong economy? No. Afghanistan continued to be unstable, chaos and death and destruction. The drug cartels set up shop, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. It was a complete mess until finally, after 20 years, the USA walked away, and now the Taliban, the very people they overthrew, are in power. You look at Iraq. Iraq used to be a quite prosperous country. In the 1980s, Iraq had a very high life expectancy. Living standards were rising in Iraq because the Iraqi government had nationalized the oil and was using the oil to provide education, to provide healthcare. The USA put sanctions on Iraq during the 90s to crush their economy. The USA invaded Iraq in 2003, and as a result, Iraq has been blown to bits. Did Iraq get more prosperous? Did it become a wealthy, prosperous society with the Western investment? No, it got poorer. Libya used to have the highest life expectancy on the African continent. It used to be the wealthiest country in Africa. People from all over the African continent were trying to get to Libya to get some of the wealth that was there, because under the leadership of Gaddafi, they had built the world's largest irrigation system. They had wiped out illiteracy. They had electrified the whole country. They had just built Libya up into being a very strong country. And when the Libyan government was overthrown, and when the government of Gaddafi was overthrown, the result has not been Libya becoming a wealthier, more prosperous country. The result has been Libya has been degrown. It's been impoverished, and it's not electrified, and there's slave markets there, and there's chaos and murder and death, and it's awful, right? Imperialism is about degrowth. Imperialism is holding countries in poverty so that Wall Street bankers can maintain their dominance. That is what globalism, imperialism is about. Lenin wrote about imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. Henry Charles Carey, the economic advisor of Abraham Lincoln, he wrote about the American system of industrialism versus the English system of impoverishing countries and underworking the Hindu and sinking the rest of the world to his level. He called it the English system. And he argued that slavery in the U.S. South, this barbaric, primitive way of doing things, was being propped up by the British, who needed that cheap cotton for their textile mills, and the Wall Street bankers, who needed to make money off those slave ships, insuring them. And that it was the English system. Alexander Dugin and the geopolitical school of thought that's rising in popularity in Russia and China talks about Atlanticism and civilizations of the sea, thalassocracy that controls the trade routes with a mighty military versus tellerocracy or Eurasianism or continentalism or civilizations of the land that prosper by engaging in development and connecting different land masses and different people on land masses with trade. Empires of the sea versus empires of the land. And that's geopolitics. And I would argue, right, that this is all just the elephant, right? This is all this is the elephant. Whether you want to follow the Leninist way of understanding it, whether you want to follow, Henry Charles Carey's way of understanding it, whether you want to follow Alexander Dugin's way of understanding it. This is the elephant. They're all pointing towards the same thing. You can call it Atlanticism. You can call it imperialism. You can call it the English system. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it globalism. It's the same thing. It is the rule of the world by big monopolies and bankers that are keeping the world in poverty. And that is the system that we are living under. Globalism, imperialism. That's what we're living under. And you can call it whatever you want, but that's what it is. All right. We're all referring to the same thing. These are all different aspects of the same elephant. And that one of the main things that the British Empire system, the globalist, imperialist, Atlanticist system is promoting is Malthusianism. The idea that there are too many people in the world. There are too many people in the world. And in order to get the world economy in order, we just have to depopulate the planet. And we need to reduce consumption. Everyone needs to be poorer. And they are pushing social engineering. The idea of breeding people like animals, right? Controlling people and getting people to depopulate, getting people to live on less with mind control, with different incentives. They view human beings as sheep. They view human beings as dogs. They view human beings as plants in their garden, and they want to eliminate us. And we have within our souls, we have human creativity. We have this drive to build and create. And so we're not accepting it the way they would like. And so they are trying to control us in order to keep us subservient and get us to just be rats in their maze, just be their sheep, just be tulips in their garden so that they can stay at the top forever. We're refusing to do that. We want to be human. We want to create. We want to build. We want to make a better life. We want to build and innovate and create. We want to have more than we have. We want to have a better life. They don't want that. They believe humanity has gone too far and that they need to depopulate and keep the world impoverished. Well, starting with the Russian Revolution of 1917, big sections of the world broke out of this system of globalism, imperialism. The Soviet Union rapidly industrialized, defeated the Nazis, invented space travel, and became an industrial superpower, not under the control of globalism, imperialism. They had a planned economy. Stalin had the 5-year plans. And their ideology was Marxism-Leninism, they were part of the Marxist movement, which had started in Europe, but they were kind of deviants from it in their own way. Leninism was a whole new thing. They were not against regular capitalism. They were against imperialism. They supported oppressed nations. They had this whole theory of the party of new type. Bolshevism was its own thing. And starting with the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, which was like an Eastern interpretation of the Marxist, the Western working class labor movement ideology of Marxism, you got the first country that broke out of globalism, imperialism. And as globalism, imperialism continued to have a crisis, you had World War II, and in World War II, the Soviet Union kicked ass, and it really proved itself in fighting Hitler and defeating Hitler, liberating Eastern Europe, and it was communists in Yugoslavia and communists in Albania and communists in China who fought against Japan, and communists on the Korean Peninsula, and communists in Vietnam, and communists everywhere. People aligned with the Soviet Union, inspired by the Soviet Union. They just really did a great job in defeating Hitler. So coming out of World War II, there was a wave of anti-colonial revolutions, and countries that were aligned with the Soviet Union started breaking out of the domination of Western capitalism. And after a while, at first, they were all communists, they were all Marxist-Leninists, but soon that changed. You got Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, and he was not a Marxist-Leninist, he was what he called an African socialist. And in the Arab world, you got Michel Aflaq and Gamal Abdel Nasser and Arab socialism and Ba'athist Arab socialism. And in Latin America, eventually you got Bolivarianism. And in 1979, you had Shia Islamic revolution, not capitalism, but Islam. And in the 20th century, over the course of the 20th century, from 1917 all the way up until today, really, but, throughout the 20th century, the foundations were laid for a new economy outside of globalism, imperialism, the rule of big bankers of London and Wall Street, a pro-growth economy. The globalists, imperialists are trying to keep countries in poverty and beat down and colonize countries. What you got in all these countries, the reason they broke out of imperialism, globalism, is they wanted to build. And Stalin built some of the biggest power plants in the world, the biggest hydroelectrical facilities. He built, modern universities. He wiped out illiteracy. He electrified the whole country. And Cuba has the greatest medical school in the world. Is they were kept in poverty by the domination of Wall Street, and they seized control of their country and they built. These were pro-growth revolutions. These were innovationist revolutions. The essence of what these countries wanted was economic growth. Now, the Soviet model, the Soviet system, the way of doing things, that was what was popular during the Cold War. And it's commonly called Stalinism, or sometimes really existing socialism, or real socialism, or Cold War communism. And that's in terms of industrializing countries, it's very, very good at what it does, right? The Soviet Union became a superpower all across Eastern Europe. Countries wiped out illiteracy, countries paved their roads, they built power plants, they built hospitals, they built up basic industries. USSR became an economic superpower. The founding of China's rebirth, China started on the course, people in China saw a doctor for the first time in their lives because of Mao's Barefoot Doctor program. Illiteracy wiped out. However, once you get over that first hurdle, once the roads are paved, once illiteracy has been wiped out, once the universities have been built, once the country's been electrified, then the rate of growth starts to slow, right? The rate of economic growth starts to slow once the foundations, the industrialization has been achieved. And on top of that, then you start to have a layer of disgruntled, high-achieving people, engineers, scientists, doctors, artists, and professors. And this is how it was in all the communist countries during the Cold War. Once they got over the big hurdle, right, in the 1930s, the Soviet Union was a powerhouse. It was go, go, go. And they built, power plants. They set world records in producing steel, and they were building because they were building their country up from nothing. And then they were invaded by Hitler, and they had a war, and they fought for their lives, and they rebuilt the country again, and it was go, go, go. But after a while, you get into the 1960s, and you got a generation of people that have, they grew up. There's always been electricity. There's always been running water. They don't remember it before. And the way that in this system, the way that people are driven to produce is there's like a spirit of hard work. They had in the Soviet Union, they called it Stakhanovism. After a guy, a coal miner who had dug record numbers of coal, and his name was Stakhanov or something like that. I'm probably butchering that if anyone who speaks Russian is watching, but he dug so much coal, and so Stalin gave him a big medal. And if you worked harder than anyone else in the factory, you got a big cash bonus and you got a big medal. And Stalin came to the factory and shook your hand. And they, if a woman had more than 10 children, she was a mother of the Soviet Union, and they gave her a special medal for having more than 10 children. And if a basket weaver weaved more baskets than anybody else, and you have, it's like in what you call really existing socialism in the Soviet model, the state is a giant corporation, right? It's like 91% state ownership. The state is a giant corporation, and you have a really charismatic CEO at the top who goes around rewarding everybody for working really, really hard. Right. And, you dig the most, and you build the most if you're a construction worker, and you have a charismatic CEO who's just going around the country rewarding everyone for working really, really hard. And everyone's really inspired because the country used to be dirt poor and suddenly it became industrialized, and they're electrifying places that never got electrified, and they're teaching people to read who've never had the chance to learn to read. And that's the Soviet model is very effective at industrializing countries that have been kept in poverty by globalism, imperialism. Cuba, North Korea, China. I mean, the industrialization is very effective. After that, there starts to be a problem, which is that people are now they take it for granted. They're like, hey, now we've got these things, but we want to have fun. We want to have fun. We want to do more things, and especially high achieving people, doctors, engineers, scientists, artists, professors. They feel very stifled. If you go to Cuba, it's very likely that if you get in a taxi, your taxi driver is a doctor, is a guy who's gone to medical school. Why is a guy who's gone to medical school driving a taxi? Well, Cuba, they have a system set up where anyone who tests in can go to their great medical school, but they don't have room for all of them in the medical field, in the medical system. So, if he's, he may not end up actually getting to be a doctor, and he's going to be very frustrated if he went to medical school to be a doctor and he ends up driving a taxi. And there's many examples of problems like that in the socialist system, right? Or a college professor, he's very smart and he has new ideas, but he's just told, you're just going to teach the party line, you're just going to teach what you want, right? And that or somebody who works in the clothing field and they design a great new dress that women could wear, and the government says, nope, we have planned production here, we only make these kinds of dresses, your plan is not approved. No. And he's not allowed to go start his own factory and make the kind of dresses that he wants. He can't do that because it's a planned economy, right? And that the Soviet model hits a block, it hits a roadblock once you've laid the foundations. Basically, the Soviet model is not good for things that make life fun. It's good at electricity. It's good at steel. It's good at paving roads. It's good at building hospitals. It's good at building schools. But it's not good at building, designing exciting, fun new forms of clothing that people want to buy. It's not good at children's toys. It's not good at candy and sweets. It's not good it's not good at enabling innovation in areas where you do kind of need people to vote with their dollars, right? You need people to not be under the domination of a state central planner and be able to go out and have their new idea. And you need people to be able to say, well, I want this and buy it, or I don't want this and not buy it, right? That when it comes to things that make life fun, the service sector, hotels, restaurants, certain commodities that are life, for enjoyment, the market is better, really, at producing innovation than the state central plan. That doesn't mean the market should have dominance, right? That doesn't mean that the market should have dominance, but it means that the market can play a role in an overall planned economy. Now, in the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc countries, the disgruntled layer of people, the doctors, the engineers, the scientists, they all kind of laid the basis for the protests that eventually brought down these governments. However, in China, starting in 1978, they had the reform and opening up. And in China, they said, poverty is not socialism. To be rich is glorious. And they said that we're going to have an economic system that is focused on creating economic growth. And we're going to use the market to do it. And they still have government-controlled industries. They still have 5-year economic plans. The government controls banking, but they bring in foreign investment. And they bring in foreign corporations, and and the people start their own business. And the government has helped create a gigantic corporation called Huawei that makes the best phones in the world. And the government has helped create the China Railway Corporation, which makes the fastest trains in the world. And that by utilizing the market under the control of a state central plan, under the control of a revolutionary state that oversees and ensures economic growth, China has become the second largest economy in the world, and 800 million people have been lifted out of poverty. They call this system socialism with Chinese characteristics. Now, in Vietnam, they've adopted a similar economic system called the socialism-oriented market economy. And it's very similar. The government has built the infrastructure. The government provides the education. The government has a 5-year economic plan to ensure economic growth. But there's all kinds of private hotels and all kinds of private restaurants and all kinds of people having their own idea. There's a tech sector that's growing in Vietnam. It's very vibrant, and it's been very successful. And they call it Vietnam's economic miracle. In Latin America, you have Bolivarian socialism. In Nicaragua, their socialist government has been very successful with its micro-entrepreneurship program, wiping out illiteracy, electrifying the country, enabling Nicaraguans. Nicaragua produces almost all of its own food now. They have a vibrant farming sector because the government empowers Nicaraguans to start their own business, their own farm, and produce their own food, and they sell it. And Nicaraguans eat their own domestically produced food. They eat very, very well because the government, through its state central plan, has enabled millions of Nicaraguans to become farmers and build and construct. In the Middle East, in Iran, they call it not capitalism, but Islam and resistance economy. That's what they call it there, but it's a very similar economic model. The biggest economic entity in the country is the Islamic Revolutionary Guards. There's a huge market sector, but the market sector is controlled and regulated by the government. This political model of countries breaking out of Western capitalism and building with a planned economy that includes a market. This is the new way of doing things. Now, what does it have in common? Well, it's a state, a government that is rooted in an anti-colonial revolution and controls the economy. So, right, these countries have all, China, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, Vietnam, Iran, they've all had revolutions against globalism, imperialism, and they all have a very popular government that came out of that revolution that controls the economy. And then that government it gives stimulus. In fact, they provide funding for people to start their own business, stimulus to small business owners. They basically create and enable small business owners to come into existence. They bring in foreign investment. They bring in foreign companies to come and do business. And they do it all in line with a central plan that is created by this revolutionary state. And the state maintains a very active and loyal population to enforce the government's agenda, to carry out 5-year plans, etc. So all of these governments, this is one thing where it gets a little controversial. It gets people fired up. But I would say if you really want to get technical about it, democracy means the rule of the people. And in some ways, according to that strict definition of the word, the rule of the people, China is more democratic than America is. Iran is more democratic than America is. Nicaragua and Cuba are more democratic than America is. They don't have the same level of freedom that we have, but the population is more involved in governing. If you go to Nicaragua, every neighborhood has a citizens' power council, and people in that neighborhood are involved in carrying out the goals of the revolution in the neighborhood. They're having a meeting every week to determine, this is what the revolutionary government, the Sandinistas, wants to get done. And they're going throughout the neighborhood to enforce it. And then the Sandinistas wouldn't be in power for a minute if they didn't have a well-organized population doing their bidding and carrying out their rule on a local level. And the same in China. The Chinese Communist Party has 90 million members, and they are in every neighborhood, every apartment building, every workplace, carrying out the goals, reporting back to each other, getting orientation. And the Chinese government would not be in power for a minute if it wasn't for a well-organized population involved in the process. Now, this is, again, it's not free democracy. If it just means rule of the people, that's involvement in the people in governing. The anti-imperialist states are far more democratic. They don't have the same level of freedom that we have. And that's a different question. But in terms of people running the government, people in power, the rule of the people, these countries are technically more democratic because people are heavily involved in ruling, and the small businesses flourish in alliance with a revolutionary state. You have a revolutionary state that controls the economy, that stimulates small businesses and oversees economic growth. That's what this new model is. And, in China, they call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. In Latin America, they call it 21st century socialism. In the Middle East, they call it not capitalism, but Islam or resistance economy. It's the same thing. right? You can go there that has different names, that has different ideologies, different religions backing it. In Russia, they used to be communist, then they had a counter-revolution in the 90s, then Putin came in, and it's like this. This is how it is in Russia, where the government controls the oil and natural gas and uses the revenue to, stimulate the different industries and build the farming sector. And, they don't call it communism in Russia, even though they have a big communist party. But whatever you want to call it, this is the system that exists in opposition to capitalism, imperialism around the world. Right. And it's going to have a different name in every country, and it's going to draw from all kinds of different wells of national culture, national history, religion, etc. It's going to be unique in every different place. In America, this movement is called innovationism. And we are building this movement. We're building something like this, whatever you want to call this. It's different in every country. It's unique to that nation, to that people and their needs, but it is pro-growth. It is pro-humanity, and it is against globalism, imperialism, and it's about having a strong state that emerges out of a struggle against globalism, imperialism, right? And it has a different name everywhere. In America, it's called innovationism. Now, in the Western countries, not just the United States, but Britain, France, Germany, Australia, places like that, there's a big divide in the political apparatus right now. And the division is between the ultra-rich globalists, the World Economic Forum, etc. They want degrowth, depopulation, social engineering. They want a low-wage police state, and they want an all-out war to crush the BRICS countries. You'll own nothing, and you'll be happy about it. You'll eat bugs. You'll live in a pod. Depopulation, etc. Right? They are creating a high-tech dark ages to stay at the top of the world, and they're high-tech dark ages. They need to make us poorer. They need to make us stupider. They need to, reduce our population, reduce our consumption, and they need to mobilize us for an all-out war against the countries that are not under their domination. Whereas the new right, they just want to make money. Donald Trump just wants to make money. And they want deregulation. They want the government to get out of the economy. And they want the free market, and they want to trade with the BRICS countries because they can make money doing so. There's a lot of wealth in China. So if American businesses can go to China and make money, great. If American businesses can go to Russia and make money, great. They're not invested in an all-out war to keep the globalist imperialist system intact. They're just thinking short term about making money. So they want the deregulation and free markets, and they want to trade with the BRICS countries. Now, neither of those groups have what we need. Obviously, the ultra-rich don't have what we need, but the new right, they don't have what we need either, right? Deregulation isn't going to do it, right? Privatizations isn't going to do it, etc. What we need is a pro-growth, pro-peace, pro-humanity, anti-monopoly coalition. All the forces that want economic growth, that want to break the world out of the domination of globalism, imperialism, need to be brought together. Working people must align with small business owners, lower level capitalists, with the BRICS countries, with pro-peace factions of the military and the policing agencies, all to break the power of the ultra-rich. We don't need a government that just steps out of the economy. That's what libertarians think. We need the government to just step out. They understand that the government is a degrowth mechanism trying to make us poorer in the hands of the ultra-rich. And they think, well, we just need to get the government out of the way. No. We need a government that will kick Wall Street's ass. That's what we need. We need a government that will break the power of the big monopolies by mobilizing a coalition of working people, small business owners, people in the military, people in the policing agencies, everyone who rejects the high-tech dark ages, rejects the low-wage police state, rejects the march toward World War III, an anti-monopoly coalition, a coalition against the big bankers and monopolies that are leading humanity towards a new world war. We need an anti-monopoly coalition. That is what is needed. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. That is the answer to defeat the deep state, to stop the march toward World War III, and stop the emerging low-wage police state. That is what is needed. Now, we are not left, because leftism comes from the French Revolution, and leftism invokes rebellion, resentment, libidinal and Oedipal impulses, rage, and vengeance. Now, leftism, the terms left and right, they come from the French Revolution, right? After the king was overthrown, they created a national assembly, and the people who were more loyal to the king sat on the right, and the people who were really excited about the revolution, they sat on the left. Leftism is kill the king. overthrow the king, cut his head off. Leftism is rage and anger and sexual desires unleashed. It is jealousy, resentment, vengeance. That's leftism. And those are destructive, toxic emotions. You cannot build a movement that's going to make society better by appealing to those emotions. And if you look at the communist governments of the world, they learned that the hard way. The Cultural Revolution in China was all about unleashing those feelings. And the Chinese government now says that was a huge mistake. And Stalin defeated Trotsky. And instead, he built a 5-year economic plan and he mobilized. And, Stalin's Russia was not about getting Russians to be resentful and jealous of each other. It was about building, etc. So, the left aesthetic is not what we are. Leftists say at this point that growth is bad and they promote degrowth. And there's all kinds of books by leftists saying that about degrowth. Degrowth is the main, it is everywhere. If you go to Barnes and Noble and you look for books against capitalism, you're going to find degrowth, a future against capitalism. You are going to find books promoting degrowth because that's what leftism is all about. Growth is bad. Leftists tend to focus on atomizing society, breaking people down into narrow identities, obsessing with peculiar minorities. Leftism is always looking for a new minority to champion, a racial minority, an ethnic minority, a religious minority, a sexual minority. They're always looking for some obscure group that is a victim of the majority, right? They see the majority as bad, and they want to find some oppressed person that they can champion against the majority. Leftists think that mass movements on behalf of the majority are fascist, right? If you're fighting for the people, the 99% against the 1%, that's fascism, right? Populism is the worst thing leftists have ever heard of, right? Populism, oh my God, you can't have that. No, because we need to find some special minority with which we can say that the majority are bad, with which we can put more restrictions on the majority. That's what leftism is very much about. And leftists then oppose patriotism, traditional families, community identity, anything that brings people together in a common interest they're against. They want to break people down into you're this special kind of LGBT, you're this ethnicity, you're from this oppressed group. They want to atomize people. Now, all of this, you could argue, is largely contrary to what communism used to be. But that's irrelevant, right? I could go to a church. There are various churches I could go to in New York City, and I could get up and I could say, you are contrary to what Jesus taught. And what good would that do? They've got a church. I'm a guy, and you can go around and say, well, I'm the true communist, or I'm this or that. Well, you can do that all you want, but that doesn't change the nature of reality. It doesn't change the fact that the communist groups largely believe in all this crap, right? The communist groups, they won't denounce this. They won't fight against it. And for the most part, they all pretty much are like this. They all are opposed to patriotism, opposed to traditional families, opposed to community identity. They think mass movements on behalf of the majority in America are fascist. They are obsessed with narrow identities and peculiar minorities. They think economic growth is bad, right? Because that's capitalist. You want more. And they hold on to the mindset and the aesthetic of the French Revolution. That's what communism is in America. So we're not left and we're not communists, right? Because that's what communism has become. But we're not right-wing either, because the right wing tends to celebrate deregulation and the free market as magically creating growth. This is a big thing. Like the right wing, they really believe all this free market crap, that if we just privatize everything will be fine. I've heard, and the amount of free market crap that has nothing to do with economic reality that I've heard from right-wingers is so sad. Right? There would never be a monopoly, Caleb, if there wasn't for the government. Well, that's funny. That's because why do we have antitrust laws then? Why does the market naturally lead to some winning and some losing? No. There's no such thing as a natural monopoly, right? It's only the government that creates monopolies. There's all kinds of things that libertarians and advocates of free markets will say that are just so contrary to reality. And they all deny that under the state central planning, we saw Russia and China become superpowers. And all of that just doesn't exist as far as they're concerned. No, everywhere communism's ever been tried, it failed. That's not actually true, right? Russia and China became superpowers. Libya had the highest life expectancy in Africa. But no. None of that's true. No. La, can't hear you. And so, and then they just believe, well, real capitalism's never existed. If we just privatize absolutely everything. And I mean, free market insanity is dished out, widely among right wingers, and they are absolutely wrong. The right wing tends to demonize groups like Muslims and immigrants and panders to fear of such groups and scapegoats them for problems that are not created by Muslims and not created by immigrants. They're created by globalism, imperialism. Yes, it's true that there are many immigrants piling into the United States from South and Central America. And yes, it's true. Many of them are in gangs and criminal organizations. Why is that? Is that because, well, that's because Latino people are all just dirty, criminal, ugly people, and we got to build a wall and keep them out? No, it's because of globalism, imperialism. Now, the left just says, oh, if you point out the problem, you're racist. Well, the problem's really there. And I mean, the people that those gangs tend to kill tend to be Latinos. So, pointing out that those groups are bad is not racist. But if you just blame people, you say, oh, that's just how brown people are. That's just racism, right? You're scapegoating them for a problem that was created by globalism, imperialism. And same for Muslims. Al-Qaeda is an awful group that kills a lot of innocent people, right? ISIS is a horrible group. But again, is that just because Muslims are just bad? Well, no, these groups were funded and created by the US government to fight against communism and to fight against Bashar Assad in Syria and to fight for their interests across the Middle East. And the governments we've overthrown in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, they tend to be governments that fought against these terrorists. So again, if you just say, well, Muslims are just bad, right? That's a common right-wing feeling. Islam is just an evil religion. Immigrants are all just inferior people, and they're, and they pander to fear and they scapegoat certain groups and blame them rather than globalism, imperialism for the problem. And that's a really big problem in right-wing circles. Furthermore, the right wing often seeks to empower policing agencies to suppress dissent, specifically for opposing Israel or for standing with the BRICS countries. And this is something the right wing is actually getting better about. I was impressed to see Candace Owens and Ann Coulter and other people speak out in support of Mahmoud Khalil and say that, no, you can't deport somebody for being pro-Palestine. But there are a lot of right-wingers who think Islam should be outlawed, that want to ban mosques because they think all Muslims are terrorists. There are a lot of right-wingers who think that it should be illegal to protest Israel. There are a lot of right-wingers that want to deport Chinese students because they think they're all spies. Right-wing circles, there's a lot of pro-imperialist ignorance and such. On top of that, the right wing mistakenly tells people that the woke left are communists and equates China, Vietnam, Venezuela with toxic pro-globalist left. I do not know how this works. It drives me up the wall. But you look at China, you look at North Korea, you look at Vietnam, and you look at the George Soros fan club, you look at the transgender rally on your campus. Apples and oranges, blue and red, night and day, white, and they're not the same thing at all. You look at like the people in North Korea marching in perfect unison, waving the flag of their country, physically fit. You look at the Chinese Communist Party, and then you look at people with 5 nose rings, screaming about you're transphobic, I'm triggered. It's not the same thing. It's not, it's got absolutely nothing to do. One has absolutely nothing to do with the other. And George Soros, who's the funder of so much of the woke left, he overthrew communist governments in Eastern Europe for the CIA. That was his whole thing. But yet, in right-wing circles, no, all the woke kids that are obnoxious and the Chinese government are the exact same thing. They're not the same. They don't believe the same things. The Chinese government's pro-growth. Woke kids are anti-growth. Chinese government's pro-family. Woke kids are anti-family. Chinese government promotes patriotism and loyalty to your homeland. Woke kids hate their country and burn flags and take a poop on the street. They're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. And it's beyond me. And this is so right-wing circles. We're not right-wing, and right-wing groups in America, conservatainment, whatever you want to call it, tends to be pro-Israel, demonize immigrants, demonize Muslims, promote insane free market policies, argue that somehow woke insanity is communism, is the same as anti-imperialist governments. So we're not right-wing either, right? The only answer is building a movement. Let me repeat that. The only answer is building a movement. I'm sorry. I'm really glad you're all watching. I really appreciate you all watching. But listening to me is not going to save you. And, a YouTube channel and a podcast is not going to save you, right? We need to build a movement. That is the only thing that we can do. We've got to build a community of people dedicated to building the anti-monopoly coalition, toward building a government of action. That we've got to build a real movement of real people who can work together and get real shit done. That's the only option. We've got to build a real movement to get real shit done. And a real movement involves teaching and teaching and teaching. And there's a lot of non-teaching going on, right? And I've got to tell you, if nobody is learning, if you're not learning, it's not helping you, right? If social media is just helping you feel more justified in your anger, if it's just making you laugh, if it's just, making you hate somebody you already hate, or making you feel more fired up about what you already think, if it's just pandering to how you already feel, it's not helping you. Organizing is about teaching, teaching, teaching. There are certain people that don't teach anybody anything. They just love to pander. And I mean, there's a huge amount of people. I mean, most of social media is nothing but pandering. Most YouTube channels, most podcasts, they don't teach anybody anything. They just pander. They just pander to what people already think. Oh, you already think this. Well, you must like this. Oh, you already think that. And that's not helping. It's all about teaching. On top of that, it's about standing with those who are under attack. The Uhuru movement, right? They had their homes raided by the FBI. And it was necessary. Everybody should have stood with them. And we are proud of all the hard work we did as an organization to stand with the Uhuru movement. And they were facing criminal charges. We were at their court dates. We raised their case at the UN. We raised their case in Russia. They were trying to throw them in prison for speaking up against war. And we stood with the Uhuru movement, because you have to stand with people who are under attack. And Scott Ritter, they raided Scott Ritter's home. The FBI raided his home just because he's an anti-imperialist. Well, we stood with Scott Ritter, right? And whenever they start trying to make it illegal to stand against globalism, imperialism, we have to loudly stand with whoever they target and not ask questions and not quibble about, oh, do they agree with us on this? Or did they say this about? No, you stand with people that are under attack, right? And it doesn't matter if you're trying to outdo them on social media. Doesn't matter if somebody said this about them or that about them. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. If they come for them, they come for all of us. An injury to one is an injury to all. You must stand with those who are under attack. Next, visibly raising anti-globalist, anti-imperialist message everywhere. Everywhere. You must raise the anti-globalist, anti-imperialist message everywhere. As loudly as you possibly can. Raise it everywhere. And we found creative ways to do that, right? We wrote a book about Kamala Harris, and we distributed it in bulk at the Democratic Convention, and exploded when they tried to ban it. What else did we do? We unfurled a banner that said, "Only peace can make America great again," in the streets outside of Trump's inauguration, outside his rally in Madison Square Garden. Again, that was an intervention. Find a way to raise this message and reach people, and distribute pamphlets, distribute books, reach people, right? And we've got to then build community structures centered around innovationism. Our goal, right? We're focused on building for July, right? Building for the convention. Our goal after July is we need a building. We need buildings so that we can start organizing in neighborhoods, right? We need to have buildings, right? Right now we're on the internet and various people. We need a building. We need to have a center, innovation halls around the country where we are doing projects in neighborhoods. That's what we're trying to do. No, going someplace and going to a church that's doing nice things and taking a selfie of yourself, that doesn't count as organizing in communities. And no, showing up one day and giving people a bunch of free stuff and then taking a selfie of yourself and saying, look, we do work in the community. That's not doing things. In order to really do community work, You have to have the infrastructure to do it. You have to have a building. You have to have a network of volunteers. You have to have an organization to carry it out. A lot of people I've been hearing for the longest time, why don't we do something like Fred Hampton's free breakfast program? I've heard that a lot. And the problem is that in order to do it, you have to build an organization to carry it out, right? If you just go to some other group that's doing it and help them do it, that doesn't really build anything. It just helps whatever group that is that's doing it. And if you just do it one time and take a picture of yourself, that accomplishes nothing. It's about having it's about having a building, a space that is reliable. It's about carrying it out on a regular basis. You have to build a machine to carry these things out, right? And, don't be fooled by certain people that are playing this game, right? And they go to somebody else's charity work and take a selfie, look at me. They're not doing Fred Hampton's breakfast program. It has nothing to do with that. And don't be fooled by people that show up one time and do a staged social media performance of themselves handing shit out. They're not doing Fred Hampton's free breakfast program. They're building a social media brand to make money, and it's disgusting. Fred Hampton building the free breakfast program was about being in the neighborhood, having a consistent way to get the food, having the food program every day, having a whole network of volunteers who would keep it going and feed those kids every day, doing the outreach so kids in the neighborhood were coming to get the free breakfast program. You had to have an organization to do what Fred Hampton did. Now, I'm not saying that that's what we should do, but before you can do anything, you have to have a building, right? And the Uhuru movement, they do all kinds of amazing things. And the reason they can do it is because they have a building. And they have a building in Florida, St. Petersburg, Florida, and they have a building in St. Louis, Missouri. And they are an amazing group because they have a building. And I look at, other groups around the country, right, that have buildings. And I see how they're a 24/7 operation. There's a church out in Los Angeles I really look up to. And this church, it's not a Sunday morning thing. It's a 24/7. I went and visited that church. I said, this church is a beehive. This church is a beehive. Every day they're hitting the streets and doing outreach, or they're fundraising, or they have a prayer service at night, and they wake up in the morning, and they have and it's a 24/7 operation. That's a real organization, right? That's a real organization. And if you're gonna build a real organization, you have to have a building, and you have to move into neighborhoods. You have to build structure to have real organizations. Real organizations don't come into existence by just taking pictures of yourself or just doing something one time and getting on social media. Building a real organization is not going to make you internet famous. And that is not the goal. The goal is to build a movement for a government of action that fights for working families. That's the goal, right? And, it means that our social media is going to get smaller probably in the short term. It means that other people are going to get all the glamour and get famous on the internet. The goal is not to be famous on the internet. The goal is not to be loved and celebrated by this system. The goal is to build a network of people to get stuff done. The goal is to have the ark finished so that when the flood comes, you can be dry and not drown. That's the goal. We must build the ark before the flood and the storm comes, right? That's what we need to do. We are Noah, and we are trying to build the ark before the flood comes. We're not trying to be famous on the internet. We're not trying to be popular. We're not trying to make ourselves feel good. We're not trying to take on the most communist identity or whatever. We're trying to build the ark before the flood comes. And the flood is getting closer every day. The flood is coming. And I hate to be pessimistic. I'm optimistic because I believe we're going to do it, and we're winning, and we're getting a huge amount done. And I'm really impressed with all that we've done. But I have to also say the flood is coming. The flood is getting closer every day, and we have got to build the ark. We've got to build the ark. There is no substitute. There's nothing that is more pressing than building the ark. We've got to build the ark. And if you get distracted by all the bullshit, you're not building the ark. You got to focus on building the ark. We've got to build the ark. We need a network of anti-imperialists. We need organizational infrastructure ASAP. Now, how do you stay on the revolutionary road? How do you stay on the revolutionary road? It's not easy. And people come and go. People come and go. right? And that's something I've just learned to deal with, right? You can't save every soul. You can't make everybody do everything. Well, the important thing to remember is that most people are living biologically. Now, what does that mean? It means that they are alive. A plant is alive. A bird is alive. A rat is alive. An ant is alive. They are technically alive. But they are not alive in the human sense. They are only alive in the biological sense. And that is the reality. There are all kinds of people, forces, most of humanity is only living biologically. They're going upon a preordained path. They're not exercising agency. They're not asking questions about why am I here, etc. They're just going along with things. They're living biologically. Our job is to awaken people and get them to not be only living biologically. Our job is to awaken people and get them involved in building a movement and get them involved in imposing imperialism and get them to understand the crisis their country is in and try to change the world around them and exercise agency. And it's much easier to live biologically, but you're not going to be happy because most people are not happy. Look at the suicide rate. Look at the drug addiction rate. Look at our society. People are not happy. People are not happy because our rulers are putting out a pessimistic message, because our rulers are saying that you're a cancer on the planet. Our rulers want you to fade away into nothing, right? And most people are not happy. And in order to find any level of happiness, you have to start to assert your humanity. You have to awaken and not be asleep and not be living biologically. You have to say, I'm going to get involved in the future. I'm going to fight for a better world. And it's not easy to do. It's not easy to do. And staying on the revolutionary road is a daily battle. And we should just recognize that not everyone can do it. Jesus Christ said, straight is the gate and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and there are few that find it. Stalin said, we communists are people of a special mold. We are made of special stuff. We are those who form the army of the great proletarian strategist, the army of Comrade Lenin, and there's nothing higher than the honor of belonging to this army. However, Mao Zedong said, the masses are the real heroes. We ourselves are often childish and ignorant. And without this understanding, it is impossible to acquire even the most rudimentary knowledge. When shit gets real, and I hate to talk that way, I sound like some kind of crazy radical or whatever, but when shit gets real, we aren't going to do it, right? I'll just be honest with you. When shit gets real, a lot of what we're going to be doing is watching it happen. It's going to be way bigger than us. All we have the ability to do is teach people and lay the foundations, build the apparatus, the structure, the programs that can give the guidance so that when shit gets real, it gets real in the right way. There's a giant boulder that's going to be rolling down the mountain. We have the ability to nudge that boulder so that it rolls in the right direction and goes in the right place. That's what we have the ability to do. But it's a huge boulder. And in order to nudge that boulder, we have to build something very, very big, and something very, very big that can nudge that boulder. But at the end of the day, we're not anywhere as near as the boulder, near as big as the boulder. The boulder is what's going to do it. It's the masses of people. It's the millions and millions of people in this country. One day, they're going to not be able to take it anymore. It's going to become very, very clear that they can't live this way. And our job is to build enough of an apparatus, do enough education, have enough community programs, have enough educational centers, have enough of an apparatus and a network of people that when that boulder starts rolling down the mountain, we can nudge it in the right direction. But the masses of people are the real heroes. And don't doubt that for a minute. And that's why we should never be elitist. We should never be thinking we're better. Oh, they're all a bunch of sheep. We're better. That's not how we think. Yes, they're living biologically for now. Yes, we have an understanding that they don't have. Yes, we are more advanced, if you want to put it that way. But that's not what's going to change the world. It will be their heroism and their brilliance and their bravery, their foolish bravery in some ways, their ability to just go out and sacrifice. That is what is going to change history when the time comes. And all we can ever hope to do, is lay the foundations, teach, build a network, build community projects, build the structure that can guide their explosion in the right way. The explosion is coming. We can nudge the boulder in the right direction. And that's a really, really important thing to understand. No, we're not just going to sit back and wait for it, right? The kingdom of God does not come through observation. The kingdom of God is within us, but it's within all of us. It's within all of us. It is the masses of people in their millions. God is within the people, and the people will awaken. Our job is to lay the foundations so they can be awakened in the right way. That when the boulder rolls down the mountain, it rolls in the right direction. When the explosion comes, it blows up in the right way. And that's all we can do. And do not ever think we can put ourselves in place of the masses. That is one of the biggest mistakes that revolutionaries make. They think that if they can go and do something heroic, they can go commit some act of terrorism or commit some act of violence. Wrong. You cannot put yourself in the place of the masses. And that's called adventurism. And when somebody does something like that, it makes things worse. It alienates the masses. It confuses the masses. We are opposed to that. We are about teaching people. We're about building structures. We're about building a network, etc. That's what we're about. We're about putting the apparatus in place so that when the crisis intensifies and when the masses can't take it anymore, we can nudge their explosion in a good direction rather than simply a destructive or confused one. The masses are the real heroes. That's really important. Now, how can you keep yourself on the revolutionary road? All right, there are a few things you need to do. First, what are these? These are icons. The Russian Orthodox Church, for thousands of years, has used icons, images of great saints, characters from the Bible, and people have them in their homes. And they pray to these icons, and they learn the story of the great saints, and they talk to them. And this is a really beautiful part of Eastern culture, right? Is they look up to great people of the past, and they seek their approval. They look to them almost like a parent, like they want them to be proud. They want to please that person. They want that great saint to be looking down on them in heaven and be thinking right about them. All of us, we're all children at one time, and the deepest need that a child has is the love of their parent. And that's a vulnerability that all of us have, right? We all want a parent's approval, a parent's affection, a parent's love. It's you could say it's a weakness, but it can be a strength too. We all have a voice in our head, a conscience that is telling us when we're doing right, when we're doing wrong. Like Freud called it a super ego. But that's a good thing, not a bad thing. And if you're going to stay on the revolutionary road, you need to cultivate your conscience. You need to cultivate your super ego. You need to cultivate the part of you that is a child that wants to please their mom and dad and have their mom and dad be proud of them. That's what you want to do. And for thousands of years, people in the East have used icons to do that. In Russia, they use these Russian Orthodox icons. In Eastern countries, they practice ancestor worship, right? And that's one way of doing it. And they draw strength from their relationship with an icon. So now you see this picture. This is a Russian Orthodox parade in Russia. I'm going to show you another picture. Do you think this is a coincidence? Do you think it's a coincidence that communist governments that proliferated in Russia and China, having a big picture of the leader became a big thing? Of course it's not a coincidence, right? This was icons, right? This picture from China, I'm all marching with all these pictures of Mao, just like these pictures here. It's the same psychological concept, right? And if you go to China today, cab drivers all have big pictures of Mao in their window, right? In Russia and even here in New York, if I take an Uber, sometimes my Uber driver is an Russian Orthodox guy and he has a bunch of icons on his door. Well, if you go to China, they've got this. It's the same kind of psychological thing, right? Is you're cultivating your super ego. You're cultivating your super ego. You want to be loved. You want to be approved of. You're thinking, what would this great saint or this great leader, what would they think of what I'm doing? How would they approve of what I'm doing? That's basically, you're cultivating your super ego, right? So that's one thing you can do. Another thing is classical music, right? And people sometimes don't agree with me, and that's fine. No one's required to agree with me. But modern music, rock, country music, jazz, R&B, is very emotional. And it's very sexual. It's very angry. It's very heart-wrenching. It's very sentimental. It's very emotional. And that it is very difficult to focus when you're feeling super sexual or super fired up or super angry or super sad or, However, classical music often is more rational. If you listen to a lot of the Bach stuff, right, it's very mathematical. It's manipulating patterns. It's rooted in patterns and changing patterns, etc. And it's more rational. It has a more intellectual appeal rather than an emotional appeal. So if you start your day every day with classical music, you end your day every day with classical music, you can keep a much clearer head. I have been doing this for 8 years now. I've been doing this, and it has done wonders for my ability to get shit done and focus, right? Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, Handel. Start your day with some classical music, and it will make a difference. It will make a difference. Now, the next thing to do is find certain phrases or words that you can memorize. If you're a Christian, find words from the Bible. If you're a Muslim, find words from the Quran. If you're really into communism, find words from Lenin or Stalin. But find words that mean something to you and memorize them and recite them to yourself. And have those words when you're stressed out, when you're worried, have those words be something you can go back to. Say those words so many times that the words just come out. You don't even have to think about them. One time I was on the train, and there was a woman on the train, and she had this counter, and it was like a click, right? And she told me that what she was doing is she was reciting a prayer to herself, and she was trying to do it so like 100 times in a day. That's a great thing to do, right? Find a phrase that is meaningful to you, that gives you power, and try to say it to yourself 200 times in a day, and count. Have a little counter and try to count and just say it to yourself, and just say it to yourself until the words are just part of you, until you can just rattle them off. You don't even have to remember them. They just come out of you. Make those words your own, and then you can go to them when you're stressed, when you're worried, when you're trying to find the answer. You can deflect back to those words, right? It's a very, very powerful spiritual technique. There's a reason that monks and priests have been doing this for thousands of years. There's a reason people were doing it in Eastern mystical countries exactly. As well. It's a spiritual practice, mantras, that is a very, very powerful way. Some people call them affirmations, right? Of using words to give yourself power. Find a phrase, find a few sentences that you could just memorize and get power from them. Next, Next, consistency. Now, I've got a list here, right, in front of me. I've got a list of things to do, and I'm scratching them off. Today, I emailed somebody I was supposed to email. I messaged somebody I was supposed to message. I talked to Noah earlier on the phone, and so I crossed it off, and I crossed it off, and I crossed it off. And I'm supposed to send somebody some books. I'm having lunch with somebody tomorrow after church, and I'm working on making a banner about something, and I'm working on an email that needs to be sent out. And I make a list. And I find it very satisfying when I cross things off my list. And it's really important. If you say you're going to do something and you do it, that is exercising agency. You're no longer living biologically. You said you're going to do something and you did it. You didn't just go along with the flow. You didn't just do whatever. I went this way, I went that way. No, you said, I am going to do this. I am going to start exercising. And then you go and you start exercising. That's called power. And you feel strength when you do that. When you make yourself do something, even something simple, right? If you say, I am going to make my bed in the morning after I get up, and you actually do it, that gives you power. And every time you say you're going to do something and you do it, you get more powerful and you assert your agency more. And every time you say you're going to do something, but then, oh, you get distracted or you focus on something else, then you lose your power, right? When you make a promise to yourself or to your friends and you do it and you fulfill it, that is a way to gain power, right? And that learn to sacrifice, right? To give to a cause you believe in. Give your money, give your time, give gifts. Learn to make promises to yourself and fulfill them. Learn to make lists that you do and you cross off everything on the list. All of that is empowering. If you can give, if there's some cause you really believe in, and you give to that cause, and it actually deprives you in a way. You think, wow, that's more money than I intended to give, but I gave to that cause. You will feel good about yourself. You'll feel powerful because you exerted force. You exerted willpower towards something you believe in, right? If you promise to your friends, I am going to do this thing, and then you go and do it, that's exerting willpower. If you make a list of things to do in the morning and you scratch off all those things on that list, you feel more powerful, right? That is not living biologically. That's taking the bull by the horns. That's asserting your humanity. It's a good thing to do, right? It's part of living as an innovationist. So be consistent. Take control of your life. Not for everyone else. For your friends, it's important. People want to be friends with somebody who's consistent, reliable, who thinks about them, is concerned about them, who keeps their word, but also do it for yourself. Do it for yourself. Stay engaged. This is the most important thing. Stay engaged. Stay engaged. When you're not feeling well, when you're feeling hopeless, when you're feeling pessimistic, it is your instinct to isolate. You think, I can't talk to anybody now. I got to be all by myself. And then it gets worse. If you're fighting with somebody who's a friend, who is part of your community, and you're feeling angry with them and you isolate from them, it gets worse. And the resentment gets worse. And the gap between you gets worse. You've got to stay engaged, right? You've got to stay engaged, right? If you're doubting, if you're worrying, that's when you need to get engaged. When you feel like not getting engaged, when you feel like not getting involved in activism, when you feel like not calling your comrades, when you feel like what's the point and it's hopeless, that's when you need to get engaged. You need to go against that drive. There is a drive in all of us. We all sometimes feel hopeless. We all sometimes feel like we can't do anything. We all feel like it's not going our way. And that is when you need to get more involved. You need to fight back against that impulse. You've got to stay engaged. When everything's going great, that might be a good time to take a break. But when you're having doubts and when you're feeling hopeless and when you're feeling tired and worried, that's when you got to go all in. You've got to push back against the drive to go back to living biologically. When that drive to go back to living biologically comes up, when that part of you that says, what's the point? There is no hope. That's when you need to get engaged. That's the opposite of the way you're feeling. You shouldn't get engaged when you feel like it. When you feel like it, it's easy to get engaged. You don't have to, it doesn't require any effort. You should get engaged when you don't feel like it, right? You have to push back. It's a daily battle to not go back to living biologically, to not be pessimistic, to not be hopeless, to actually take the bull by the horns and try to change the world. And you have to fight the battle. And it's not easy. It's not easy to fight the battle. It's hard. But if you don't stay engaged, if you isolate, if you cut yourself off from it when it's hard, it's only going to get harder. I mean, I talked about people, that when they were in college, they missed class, right? They skipped class, right? They slept in, they missed class. Well, when they miss one class, they're a little bit nervous to go to the next class. And then if you miss two classes, it's even more nervous to go. That's what it's like. You have to push back against your fears. You have to push back against any negativity you have. And the more you isolate yourself and the more you cut yourself off from it, the harder it is. The harder it is to get back involved. So you have to fight against the negative impulse, the destructive impulse, right? Everyone needs a break. We all need a break sometimes, and that's fine. But I'm telling you that if you are feeling hopeless, if you are feeling like there is no point, if you're feeling like there's not a way to get involved, if there's no point, that's when you need to be involved. If you are happy about things and you're confident, but you just need to take a break to slow down, that's fine. But if you're having doubts, if you're feeling hopeless, then you really need to get involved. Then you shouldn't break away. And again, that goes against what you're trying to do. A lot of this is not living biologically. That's living biologically, is just doing whatever you feel like, right? Just whatever you feel like doing. That's how that's how monkeys in a zoo exist. They just do whatever they feel like, right? That's how the weed in my garden exists. Just does whatever it feels like, right? Being human means not just doing whatever it feels like. It means actively making decisions and deciding to push back, not living biologically, right? That's what we're trying to get at. And the organization is the most precious thing. The organization is the most precious thing. Nothing can keep you on the revolutionary road like an organization, right? Nothing can help you stay engaged, can help you be consistent. Nothing can give you the fulfillment and give you the awakening and give you the empowerment that being in an organization is. Being in the Center for Political Innovation, being part of our movement, is being alive. It is the most precious thing. So that is my slideshow for tonight on living as an innovationist. And I hope you all found it useful.